Hello friends, this is Dr. S.S. Deshpande, Principal of JG College of Commerce, Ahmedabad. Now today we will try to understand the policy of import substitution, which is part of 6th semester BCom syllabus in economics. Generally, it is asked as a 4-mark answer in the examination. And when this question is asked, you should basically cover these 6 points. The first is the meaning of the policy of import substitution. The second, objectives of this policy, the tools which were used to promote import substitution. Number 4, import substitution in India. Number 5, the advantages of this policy. And finally, the limitations or disadvantages. We begin with the first point, that is the meaning of import substitution policy. Now, it is the policy of producing certain goods domestically, that means within the country, which were till now imported from outside. So basically the policy of import substitution means the policy of substituting the imports with the domestic output or domestic production. The second point is the objectives of import substitution policy. Now, when the government adopted the policy of import substitution, it had 5 objectives in mind. The first one was to make the country self-sufficient and self-dependent. The second one was to conserve the precious foreign exchange reserves. The third objective was to reduce the deficit in the trade balance. The fourth was to increase the rate of economic growth. And the fifth one was to increase the diversification of the Indian industry. Next, we try to understand the tools which were used by the government to promote the import substitution by discouraging the imported goods. Now, you should understand that for import substitution, it is important to restrict the imports. So restricting the imports is necessary if you want to encourage import substitution. And hence, the country would need certain tools to discourage the imports. Now, let us see which were the tools used by the government to promote the import substitution. The first tool was tariff. Now, please remember that the tools which are used to discourage the imports are the tools to promote the import substitution. So the first one was tariff. Now, as you all know, that tariff is a tax on the imported goods. And what will this tariff do? It will make the imported goods more expensive and will discourage their use, thereby promoting the substitutes of the imported goods. The next tool was import quotas. Now, import quota basically refers to fixing the maximum limit on the imports of a commodity during the period of 1 year. So if import quota is fixed, the foreign companies will not be able to export beyond a certain limit because our country will not import beyond that limit. Number 3, supporting the domestic producers. Now, in order to encourage the Indian producers to produce the substitutes of the imported goods, government tried to support them by providing them cheaper loans. That means loans at lower interest rates. Similarly, by giving various subsidies, technological support, etc. So these were the tools which were adopted by the government of India to promote the import substitution. The next point, that is number 4, import substitution policy in India. Now see, during the first 7 5-year plans, India adopted the policy of import substitution. Now, as you all know that the planning in India, the 5-year planning started in India in 1951. So right from 1951 till the end of the 7th 5-year plan, the government tried to promote this policy of import substitution. And it was from the 8th 5-year plan that the government started adopting the opposite policy, that is the policy of import liberalization. So this basically means that the policy of import substitution was adopted in the first half of 5-year planning. And since the 8th 5-year plan, the government is trying to promote the imports. The policy is more liberal towards the imported goods. Now, India was able to produce many products like vehicles, machines and equipments, oil, some defense equipments, medicines, textiles, etc. within the country, courtesy the policy of import substitution. Next is the most important point of the answer, that is the advantages of import substitution policy. Now, there are six main advantages of the policy of import substitution. The first is self-dependence. Now, naturally, if we can produce the substitutes of imported goods within the country, we will become more self-dependent and self-sufficient. Our dependence on foreign goods will decrease. So that's the first advantage. Number two, increase in our GDP. Now, when the country tries to produce the substitute goods of the imported goods within the country, the total output in the country will increase. Our gross domestic product or the national income will increase, because now we are not purchasing goods from outside, we are producing them on our own, and that's the reason that our GDP will increase. Number three, increase in the employment. Now, more the output produced within the country, greater the number of jobs created in the country. So, under the policy of import substitution, the government tries to produce more and more goods within the country instead of importing them from outside. And that's the reason that domestic output and employment increases. Yet another big advantage of the policy of import substitution was to save the foreign exchange reserves. Now see, as the policy promoted the production of goods domestically, we were not required to import heavily from outside. And as we don't import that much, naturally our expense of foreign exchange will reduce. So the policy of import substitution indirectly helps in saving the foreign exchange reserves. Number five is reduction in the deficit in the balance of trade. The balance of trade is basically a systematic record of countries' imports and exports for a given year. Now, because of the policy of import substitution, our imports will decrease as compared to the exports, and as a result, there will be lesser deficit in the trade balance. And number six, increase in the foreign direct investment. Now, when the country adopts the policy of import substitution, it discourages the imported goods. For example, the government of India is telling the foreign companies that don't just sell in India, make in India. So if the foreign companies now want to sell their products in India, they cannot simply export it from their own countries. They will have to make foreign direct investment in India. They will have to set up a unit and they will have to make the foreign direct investment. So because of the policy of import substitution, indirectly we are encouraging the FDI in our country. So these are the six main advantages. And finally, let us have a look at the limitations or the disadvantages of this policy. The very first limitation is higher price and poor quality of the products. Now, when the Indian producers tried to produce the substitutes of the imported goods, so they were not able to produce very good quality. So Indian substitutes of the imported goods were slightly inferior in quality because the producers were producing many of these goods for the first time. And secondly, the cost of production was also comparatively higher in comparison to the foreign companies. And as a result, those Indian goods were relatively expensive. So higher price and poor quality of the products is the first limitation of the policy of import substitution. Now, the second limitation of the policy was high population of the country does not allow reduction in imports. Now, mainly this policy of import substitution was aimed at reducing the imports. But the problem was that simultaneously the population of the country was growing so rapidly that despite producing the substitutes of imported goods, India was not able to reduce the imports substantially. So high population of the country reduced the effectiveness of the policy of import substitution. And finally, retaliation by the other countries reduced our exports. Now see, as India discourages the imports from other countries, naturally the other countries will retaliate. So other countries also stopped buying many products from the Indian companies. So that was the third limitation. So these are the 6 points: the meaning, the objectives, the tools of the policy, its advantages and disadvantages. These are the points which should be covered in the answer on the policy of import substitution. Thank you. Thank you very much.